10 things you should look for when buying jewelry, coming up next on Body Piercing Basics, episode number 94, so stick around. For those that happen to be new to the channel, my name is DaVo. I'm a professional body piercer and have been since 1994. I own and operate the ATSM Body Piercing Studio, located right here in Des Moines, Iowa, inside Skin Kitchen Tattoo. So when I talk to you about these things, I'm talking to you at a level of expertise that comes from being in the body piercing industry for well over 26 years. Here's what I'm going to get into today. 10 things that you should look for when you buy or purchase jewelry. Most of this will work either in person. Some of it will work slightly if you're buying or purchasing online. But it's still all things that you should consider, especially when you're evaluating jewelry you may have or jewelry that somebody gives you or what have you. First thing we generally talk about when we talk about jewelry is the material, what it's actually made out of. My thought on this is if it's safe to pierce with, it's safe to wear in the body even after it heals. I generally don't suggest if you have any type of metal allergies or any type of sensitivity or anything else that you wear anything in your body for a long period of time that you may have a reaction to. So sticking with those basic what works options is your best option, even though there's a lot of stuff out there that doesn't fall in this list. Now, this list is going to be the mainstays. The first one would be probably the most common or easy to find, the workhorse of the body piercing industry since the 90s or way back in the 80s, Implant surgical stainless steel. The next one would be implant grade niobium. Niobium is a little rarer than it used to be, but it still exists. You can still find some manufacturers that do produce it. It was the original multicolored rings. The next one is probably the crowd favorite and the one that most people will suggest whenever you ask them about what metal to use, and that's implant grade titanium. You should understand that titanium, unlike niobium, is an alloy. Niobium is a pure element. Titanium, yes, it's listed on the chart as an element, but the reality is the stuff that you generally get pierced with and that's used for hip replacements, the stuff we consider biomechanical, is in fact an alloy. So it's very important that it's implant grade because there's various different grades of all these materials, but especially titanium. The next one is probably the old mainstay in 14 karat solid gold or better, not filled or plated, and I would suggest yellow. If you get colored metals, if you have any type of sensitivity to any type of materials, you should avoid things like white gold and rose gold. They have trace elements in it and other things to create that color, and some people will have reactions to those, just to let you know. So yellow gold, 18 karat or better. If you are sensitive to materials, I would suggest going as high as 18 karat if you can find it. Next thing is ceramics or glass. Both of them are innate, fine to pierce with, fine to wear after the fact. Only problem they generally have is, at least that I've come across, is some of the manufacturers kind of push the numbers on the sizing. You really want to be careful that it is the correct size and it's from a reputable company. Then it just comes down to the durability. They do take a little bit more work just basically because it's glass. It's somewhat fragile. Then we have organic materials. Now, these aren't really usually very suited for initially doing a piercing. However, after the piercing is healed, they should be perfectly fine. They can be used also to stretch piercings. And those are things like bone, hardwoods, stone, antlers, fossils. With those, they do take a little bit more maintenance sometimes, so you do want to check with the manufacturer when you get it, how to properly take care of them, and etc. Now that I've talked about things that do work, let's talk about a few that don't. I really don't suggest acrylic. Even if it is certified dental acrylic was not designed to be put against the flesh in that way, and to sit inside the body for long periods of time. It is a man-made material, and there is always a possibility of toxins leaking out and getting into your bloodstream and causing problems. It's poison, basically, is what I'm getting at. The other problem with acrylic is usually people suggest it in oral piercings, etc., and I have in the past, I'll admit it, is the constant contact and deterioration of that, and then you, in fact, digest it. What exactly happens to those little pieces of plastic? It's really hard to say if the body breaks it down or immediately just disposes of it the way that the body does. So, with acrylic, I don't really advise putting it in piercings for long periods of time. Also, you're going to find that acrylic can also cause damage to teeth and gums, especially gums and with labret studs and etc. It's going to cause just as much problems. The next one's bioplastic. First off and foremost, I should explain, Bioplastic is a name brand. It is not a scientific developed material. If you look up bioplastic on the internet, what you're going to come across is a lot of information either about the company that manufactures this stuff, or you're going to come across this idea that bioplastic is made of natural materials. But the problem with that is that they say natural materials, but it's also recycled plastic. So, bio is kind of it gives this impression that it's biocompatible. The fact is we have no idea if it's safe, healthy, or what have you. A lot of people have had good success and no side effects, but it's like acrylic. We don't know. There's no way to know whether or not the stuff is biocompatible, so I suggest avoiding it, especially in healing piercings. Next one, silver. Silver has a whole load of problems, and it's a common cheap substitute. It's used either the whole jewelry is made out of it, or at least the ends or pieces. It's easy to work with. You can get lots of different shapes. You can mold it into different shapes. You can use it for settings, etc. Silver, the problem with it is usually when it comes in contact with mucous membranes or areas of the body that are more likely to absorb materials, as it tarnishes, it leaks out silver salt. Your body then absorbs it, and it can lead to silver poisoning, which is a permanent darkening or tattooing of the area, usually a bluish brown, bluish gray, sometimes a little green. That is permanent. The only way to remove it is by having it cut out. I don't suggest, even if it's just the ends, putting anything in silver against your body for a long period of time in that case. Okay, so the last one's going to be silicone. Silicone is probably the newest animal to the plant, to the piercing industry. It works really well with plugs. You can basically squeeze that silicone together, put it in a piercing, and it just expands to the size of the piercing. This is safe to a degree for just wearing for day-to-day wear, but if you use it for piercing or stretching, it tends to stick to the actual tissue of the inside of the piercing and can cause once it heeds to it, it can cause a lot of damage when you try to take it out. You'll basically rip out the skin tissue. So I don't advise it. And even if you're putting it in a heel piercing, you be very cautious about who you're exactly getting it from. There's some very unreputable people out there selling this stuff. There's only a few that really have done the research and made sure that they're somewhat biocompatible. It's not quite as dangerous as, say, acrylic and bioplastic is, but it's still something you should consider. Next thing is whenever possible, try to get some type of third-party certification that the material they're selling you is, in fact, implant grade and biocompatible. The most common way of doing this is asking for the ATSM numbers, which is the American Standards of Testing and Measuring. They're an independent laboratory that tests the purity of materials and various other things like light sockets and etc. to know whether or not they're safe, or if when they're telling you it's 20 pounds, it's in fact 20 pounds. It's the only real way of knowing whether or not that material is actually what they say it is. So Always ask, and if you're at a piercing studio, and they, of course, are not going to have the certification sitting there in most cases, the mill certificates, at least they're going to know the ATSM numbers, they're going to know who the manufacturer is, and they're going to know whether or not it's safe. If they don't know what that is or have no idea, chances are they're buying from anybody that'll sell to them, and they're probably getting a majority of their materials, their piercing jewelry, in bulk from mass production and probably the Middle East. Or not the Middle East, but probably from Asia. Next one, number 4. Is the jewelry internally threaded or threadless? There is a huge difference when I'm talking about threaded jewelry like barbells, curved barbells, circular barbells, and etc. There's a huge difference in quality between a piece that is internally threaded, where the ball has a piece of threading that threads into the post, to the opposite, which is one that has threading on the post and the ball screws on it kind of like a nut. Also usually threaded or threadless jewelry where you stick a pin in it and it locks into place is usually also another sign that it's better quality jewelry. So try to avoid external jewelry whenever possible. A lot of the really cheap stuff that you see out there, all of it is externally threaded. It doesn't have the quality level. Plus, the threading can cause damage, and the thread, the turns is a lot less, meaning the number of times it takes to tighten and loosen the jewelry. So you're more prone to losing ends. Let's talk a little bit about the finish and the quality of the finish and some things you want to look for. Now, with titanium, sometimes it can have kind of a dull finish to it. It's almost a polished aluminum look, but it should still be reflective or mirror-like. Implant-grade steel should be very mirror-like. You should basically be able to brush your teeth while looking into it. Niobium can be a little bit less shiny, but still has that shininess to it. Gold, of course, is going to always have that translucent look to it. To the touch, it should feel glass-like or smooth. There should be no rough edges, no points, no texture to it. With niobium, black niobium will probably have a little bit of a texture to it, and that's one of the reasons why we don't suggest piercing with it initially. The way they get that black niobium is just basically burning off all the carbon they can out of it to the point where it's burnt black. So it could have a rougher finish than other types of jewelry. It should be safe to wear in a healed piercing. I just really wouldn't advise using black niobium in a fresh piercing. Now, one thing you should always look at if you're looking at curved jewelry or circular jewelry, curved barbells, rings, etc., circular barbells. You should look at the finish on the inside of that curvature. That is the hardest part of the entire thing to polish. If it seems rough or it doesn't seem like it's consistent with the rest of the jewelry, it's probably a low-grade piece of jewelry. Lastly, the edges or ends, the area that the closure goes in on the ring or where the balls screw in, it should have a smoothness to it. There should be no sharp edges or points there. Number 6, the ends should have no sharp edges or points. There should not be any type of roughness to it. If they're balls, of course, it should be mirror-like smooth, just like the finish on the rest of the jewelry. Shaped objects, of course, if you have a 3-prong or a 4-prong piece of jewelry, there's going to be some edges to it. But even those, if you look at them closely, if it just doesn't seem like they fit or it hasn't been worked correctly or there's scratches or what have you, it's probably a low-grade piece of jewelry, and you should avoid it. Number 7, with threaded jewelry, this is especially true. Make sure that the ends are tightly, when you thread them on all the way, they fit tightly. There should be no gaps, no edges. Some of the better end ones, the ball will have almost an indentation, or it will have an indentation where that the edges of the ball screw over the top of the post. The more closure and the tighter that closure is, usually the higher the quality of jewelry. Same thing goes with threadless. There should not be any gap or weirdness, and it should not fit in there crookedly. It should fit in there straight. Cat bead rings, same thing. There should be no gaps or edges there in between the jewelry and the ball. It should just fit into one seamless piece. Now, gauge and width. This is something that you generally have to check, and it varies from manufacturer to manufacturer sometimes. Most of the high-end manufacturers are pretty much standard. They either use one or two measurements. They either use the gauge, which standard gauge wheel, basically chart, whatever you want to call it. That's used in medical equipment and scientific and wire gauging and etc. It's pretty much the same universal. The problem is that some have started switching over to millimeters. And they have a tendency that if the gauge is, let's say, 1.89, rounding up to 2 millimeters. So it can greatly affect that size difference. I would say that if it is in millimeters, you can pretty much you can figure it out if you just do a quick Google search. But yeah, for the most part, millimeters kind of makes more sense. I would like to see the manufacturers move in that direction, mainly because it allows a more precise and more consistent increase in size. The the wire gauging tends to have some huge jumps in it that, when you're stretching, piercings, and etc., can make a huge difference. On width, it's either going to be imperial quarters of inches or eighths of inches or 32nds of inches, or it's going to be millimeter. Millimeter tends to be maybe a little easier to understand than the imperial chart, but it should be from the inside of the balls, if it's a threaded jewelry, or the inside of the apex of the circle, the width on the inside between each side. It should not be from the outside. It should always be from the inside. The other thing you should avoid is anything that's plated or coated. I don't care if it's electroplating or it's PVD plating or whatever they want to come up with. The other thing I want to tell you at this point in time is there is no such thing as black titanium. Unless it's recently been developed in the last 20 minutes, it doesn't exist. What they're doing is they are actually covering that in some cases with a PVC-like coating. It's rubber-ish plastic. It is not the same as titanium, and it is not safe, in my opinion. It tends to wear off. All it takes is one slight little tear or slight little scratch, and it's falling apart. If you want black jewelry, the only way to get it is niobium. Sorry. Also, don't let anybody tell you that steel plated with titanium or with gold or platinum or anything else is as safe as solid materials. You should always try to get solid materials whenever possible. The plating tends to wear off fairly rapidly, especially during the healing process, and what you're going to get stuck with is whatever's in it, under it. If you're lucky, it's going to be something that your body can tolerate. It'll be biocompatible materials. If you're unlucky, it'll be something else, and you'll start having allergic reactions. The last thing you should look for, number 10, is that the jewelry is wrapped separately, that it is in separate containers. It isn't in a big, giant container banging against each other. Ideally, it should be in a sterile package that's been sterilized in an autoclave by itself, with the sizing information, etc., on the back, and possibly the date when that was sterilized. Well, that's 10 things you should look for when you're buying jewelry. If you found this interesting, edifying, or educational, give me a thumbs up, because I like it when you like it. If you haven't subscribed already, I begin to question why. Go ahead and subscribe, hit that notification bell so you're notified every single time we post something. If I brought up a question or you have a question that I didn't cover or what have you, feel free to leave a comment. I usually answer them when I have time. If you like merch, you like t-shirts, you like fanny packs, you like throw pillows, check out our merch store. Link is in the description. There's also one of those merch bars down below. Till next time, here's hoping all your piercings heal with ease and without a single issue. And if you're in the Des Moines, Iowa area, I hope to see you for your body piercing needs in the future. Have a good day, everybody. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.